Chapter 4. Sneaky Pete. Pete Franceschi, the shaved-headed co-conspirator currently chasing a red Jeep down a two-lane asphalt road, was already calculating their chances on coming out of this on top. Specifically, he was calculating his chances. He sat behind the wheel of the late-model Chevy and glanced to his right. Mitch, sitting in the middle, was sporting a few pellets of buckshot in his leg. Their leader, Mason, had a few in his left arm. Thankfully, the old guy had been a lousy shot, or all of this could have been worse than it already was. Mason looked to be in the poorest shape of the two. The redneck had gotten in a couple of punches to his face as well. It was nothing that they could not come back from, however. All of this fiasco was Mitch's fault. When it came time, Pete was going to make sure to hang all of this around that idiot's neck. It was Mitch that had been given instructions to swap the plates out. Neither one of the other two considered checking his work. They just assumed it was done correctly. I mean, how hard of a job was it to swap a couple of license plates? It was also Mitch that had screwed up killing the cook. And how did that guy go from being armed with a baseball bat to shooting at them with a shotgun? All of this may have been Pete's idea, but it was Mitch's screw-ups that had them in the situation they were in now. When he reported all of this to the boss, he was going to make sure and spin it bad enough that Mitch didn't make it out of this alive. Of course, this still wasn't over yet. Maybe he would have an opportunity to get rid of Mitch himself. Pete started off as a low-level foot soldier in the Kaiser crime family. They had their hands in almost everything illegal in Colorado and the surrounding states. Their primary source of income had been in marijuana and other drugs, but that all changed when pot became legalized. They adjusted, of course, but they were still not bringing in the revenue that they once were. That was the move Pete had made in trying to climb the ladder of success. He'd been given an errand of informing the boss about something. Since he had him face to face, Pete made the bold move of suggesting that there was a way to use the legalization to their advantage. His idea was to open up a few pot shops legally. Not only would it offer a source of income, but since it was mostly a cash business, it would give them an opportunity to launder their money as well. The boss, real name Charles, also known as Big Chuck, said that they had already put those things in motion. He liked Pete's motivation, however, and how he was trying to support the organization. He was promoted to a right-hand man position for one of Chuck's sons, the wounded Mason Kaiser sitting on the opposite side of the bench seat. He had done his best to befriend the guy. He had done his best to prove he was an asset to the family. When Mason mentioned that he had recently been given free rein on trying to set up other streams of revenue, he suggested this scam. It had multiple benefits, he explained. Small teams of guys wanting to prove themselves, along with small-time gang members, could run this scam in Colorado and the surrounding states. They would pose as buyers to people wanting to sell their used weapons, and sellers to those looking for a good deal. They would focus only on higher-end stuff in order to get quality goods and to bring in customers with lots of cash to spend. If they posed as buyers, they could dump hot cash or counterfeit bills in the exchange. If the opportunity presented itself, they would just steal the weapons by setting up an ambush at the meet point. With some of the newly acquired weapons, they would remove the serial numbers and sell them for triple or quadruple the value on the black market. A $500 Glock would go for $1,500 to $2,000 as an example. Other guns would be used as bait for buyers looking for a deal. Again, they would set up an ambush and just take the cash. Plus keep the weapons. In many cases, the sellers would also be armed with concealed carry permits and other handguns. They would confiscate those too and add them into the mix. If the mark happened to bring friends to the exchange for added protection, they could just simply run it like it was a legit deal. Or they could spring the trap on all of them and add to their inventory. Lastly, if they decided to ambush the buyers or the sellers, they could also bring fake plates to the deal and make off with any nice vehicles as well. They could in turn strip them down at one of their many chop shops. The best part in using guys that were not firmly connected to the family, there was an insulation buffer to avoid prosecution. Well, Mason loved the idea, but he wanted to try it out a few times in order to establish a set of guidelines that worked the best. Then they could teach those to the ones they commissioned to run the scam. The redneck they were now chasing was the first test case. Guy in the first time, He had insisted on choosing the meeting location. It was at the end of a big department store parking lot. Just as they were about to spring their trap, a church van loaded with kids in the middle of a road trip somewhere pulled in fairly close and piled out to stretch their legs and run into the bathroom. They were forced to let the guy buy the weapon like it was a legitimate deal. They even attempted to follow him, but lost him at a red light. Since they had contact information on him, they tried another setup, and the redneck fell for it. It was going to be a nice first haul. 10 grand in cash was not a bad way to start. Then Mitch had to go and screw it all up. To make matters worse, Big Chuck's youngest son was now injured, and Pete was pretty sure someone was going to pay heavily for that transgression, and he was not going to let it be him. Up ahead, he saw the Jeep swerve around a slower truck. He followed suit. The Jeep, with its V8 motor, was pulling away from them in their slower V6 truck, and Pete silently Chevy to go faster. If the redneck got away, Big Chuck's anger and vengeance was going to be even worse. Taking it out on Mitch might not be enough for him. If the redneck managed to get to a phone, they might even be headed to prison. Tail lights on the Jeep suddenly lit up bright red, and the redneck went sideways as he four-wheel drifted through an opening in an old wooden fence. He gunned it into a canyon on the right side of the road and disappeared into the trees. As Pete got close, he could tell this was private property, not some dirt road that simply cut through the mountains. An aging iron archway about 18 feet in height stretched over the entrance. It had steel letters welded to the top of the frame that read Midget Mine Ranch, and there was a cattle guard cutting across the gravel road. He tore through the opening and quickly looked left and right. To his left stretched a babbling stream carving its way up the valley through thick stands of pine. High cliff walls on both sides wound their way forward as far as he could make out through the trees. The dirt road hugged close to the right-hand side. What seemed to be missing from view, however, caused Pete to smile and slow down. Mason jerked his head left with fire in his eyes. "What are you doing? He's getting away." "Take a look, boss," he reasoned. "This is private property. Judging from the layout of this canyon, this is probably the only way in or out. Secondly, there's no power line poles. They don't bury residential lines out here. It's too rocky. That means this guy lives off the grid. And no power line poles also mean no land phone. We have his cell, so he can't call for help. We've got him trapped." Pete grinned. Mason indeed did look around, and Pete seemed to be right. The more he got to know Pete, the smarter he seemed to be. That was both a good thing and a bad thing, just depending on how far his loyalty went. He'd have to keep his eye on this guy. Pete followed up with more analysis. "Plus, we need to be cautious here. We know he probably has a few guns. We don't want to go rushing in. We can't catch him before he gets to where he's going. So, when we find him, he's going to be armed. We can still do this, though. I have a plan." He winked. Pete's brain was always spinning looking for an angle, and he really was formulating a plan. It was a plan that involved sacrificing that idiot Mitch. But as they say, 2 birds with 1 stone.